Hey, welcome back. So I have a brand new video for you today. So today I like to talk about my journey as a street photographer, how I began and some of my struggles and how I overcame them, and also talk about what my 7-year journey as a street photographer has taught me. All right, let's get into it. My journey into photography and street photography, we have to go all the way back to when I was a kid. And back in the day, my dad, he was really into photography and he took a lot of photos of me and my sisters. And he had a couple of cameras, and I think this one was one of them. And this is the Zenith E. This is an old film camera. It's really heavy, and we recently found it, and it's actually still working. I have a film in it right now. It's the HP5 black and white, and I think I've taken 25 frames already with it. And this is really cool because you can really practice your composition using this camera. When I was 15 or 16, I remember having a old Canon film camera. It was not a fully manual camera, but it was a semi-automatic. Having that camera also kind of sparked something for me in terms of photography, because later on I bought this really nice small Sony camera. It is called the Cybershot. I don't know the model here, but it's the Cybershot. It has 5 megapixels, so it's a really cute small camera. And I recently found it, and I don't think it's working anymore because it has a compact flash memory, and I'm not sure if those are still available. But this is really a testament to that I was really into photography. And I remember I think I bought this in the early 2000s. And if you fast forward to 2016, that is where my journey into street photography began. I had this work colleague that I used to go out with on photo walks, and I was just walking with him, and I didn't have a camera at that time because film photography was basically old school and everything was getting into being digital. And I remember just going out with him, and he was really into photography, and I took a lot of photos. I decided to buy a camera, and the first camera I bought was the Micro Four Thirds format, and it was the Olympus OMDE M10 Mark II, quite a long model number. And I remember having that camera for a very short period, but I actually ended up buying a few lenses for it. And the reason why I kind of sold it again, because it was too advanced for me. I didn't know anything about photography or how to operate a camera. And back then, that camera was really kind of advanced for me and my skill level. And after I sold that, I decided that I wanted a camera that was a bit more hard wearing and that had a better grip. So after some research, I decided to buy the Canon 800D, which is also called the Rebel T7i series. And I had that camera for almost 3 years, and I practiced on that camera for a long time until I really understood the different aspects of photography. And I paired it with a pancake lens. It was a 24 millimeter on a crop sensor. It equaled to almost a 50 millimeter. And I had another additional lens for it too. It was a 50 millimeter, so that would be roughly an 85 millimeter. I never used that lens because it was too tight for me back then. So I mostly had my pancake lens on, and I used it for many, many years. And around 2021, I've really outgrown my Canon 800D and I wanted a new camera. And also around that time, there was an extreme hype around full frame cameras, and the Sony A7 Mark III was just like the ultimate camera everybody was raving about. And I wasn't ready to buy it because I've done it once before when I bought a camera and it was too advanced for me. So I wanted to be really careful. And a year went by, and the Sony A7C was already released, but it didn't get any good reviews on it for most of the YouTubers back then. And I took a leap of faith and I bought that camera, and it's been a really good camera for me and my type of street photography. That's kind of my journey into kind of the gear as well. Recently I bought the Fuji X100V. You can see it on the table there. And this is a crop sensor. And so I have had multiple different cameras and also different camera brands, but I would say Sony is my main camera brand because I have a lot of lenses for it, and I've kind of invested a lot in the ecosystem of it as well. Talking about photography and street photography made me realize how long I actually been passionate about photography in general, and also looking back at the different cameras that I had and kind of what are the struggles that I had, and also how I matured and grown into the kind of the street style that I have right now. Developing my street photography style, and I would say it took me years to develop the style that I have right now. And I would describe it as being, high contrast photos, a lot of light and shadow play. I like the stark contrast between light and shadows. That's why I also like silhouette photography. And I also like clean, minimalistic shots with a little bit of movement, because I think storytelling is also important when you're looking at a photo. So I try to capture all those different elements when I'm taking a photo. One of the key factors for me was really understanding the different focal lengths, and that really helped shape my current street photography style. And as I mentioned before, I had the 24mm pancake lens that was roughly a 50mm focal length. And to this day, I still love the nifty 50 focal length. I also came to understand that my street photography style is based on the fishing technique. And basically, a fishing technique is that you set up a frame and you wait for your subject to come into the frame and take the shot. And to do that, it's best to have a longer focal length, and especially in my case. And that's why I really like the 85mm focal length. And I also think about buying maybe the 105 or 135mm focal lengths, because it gives you that a little bit more separation from your subjects. You can actually stand a little bit on your own and not be disturbed by the surroundings or people walking by. I do believe that street photography styles do change and grow and evolve over time as you grow and evolve as a photographer. And it's perfectly okay to have one specific type of street photography style. But for me personally, I would say my current street photography style is what I like right now. And I also like to experiment a lot. And this is why I also bought my Fuji X100V, because I wanted to try out something different. And on that camera, I only have one lens and it's fixed, and it's a 35mm. And typically I don't use a 35mm focal length. So for me, it's also a unique way to try something else and also maybe get into a particular street photography style that I might like. So in my opinion, developing your street photography style is very personal and is very subjective. Every photographer has their own unique street photography style. It's all about going out, experimenting, and figuring out what you like. Let's talk about some of my biggest struggles. And I would say hands down, one of my biggest struggles over the years has been to understand basic camera theory. And what I mean here is the exposure triangle. So the ISO, shutter, and aperture, and how they work in combination, but also individually. And until I gained that understanding, my photos were completely out of focus, blurry, unwanted movement. And that frustrated me a lot. And I've talked about this on the channel before. And I invested the time to really understand it. And it was only a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, where I really understood. And I started using manual mode. And it's not to be an elitist and a snob about using manual mode. I do use aperture priority mode a lot as well. My point here is that the basic camera theory is kind of the foundation of everything in photography. So it's really worth the investment and time to really understand that. Looking back, one of my other struggles was that I took on too much too quickly. And what I mean is that I had not one focus area, I had multiple, and I tried to learn about multiple different photography aspects too quickly. And when you do that, you can really end up overwhelming yourself. And that's what I did, because I was really trying to understand, my settings, my camera, and also, trying to understand why my photos were blurry, while I was trying to also understand color theory. So, my recommendation is that you really focus on one focus area, dedicate all the time to you really understand it, and you can recite it in your sleep, and then you're good to go and move on to the next one. Another struggle of mine was to edit my photos and really get that unique style and, the expression that I wanted in a photo. And it took me some time to understand that. And it really fell into place when I really started to understand what my unique personal preference for street photography style was. What my journey has taught me so far. So let's talk about some of the guiding principles that I practice and live by to this day. Let's start with the first one, which is really understand your camera gear. And what I mean by that is really understand the capabilities or limitations of a specific camera gear. For myself, that was an active choice of buying only prime lenses, because back then when I was learning and I was a beginner photographer, I really wanted to understand how to compose my photos. And with a fixed focal length, that is easy, because you really understand what are the capabilities and what are the limitations of that. So for example, if I go out with my 85mm, I know exactly what kind of photos I can come home with, and also what are some of the limitations with that focal length. So my point here is that really spend time in understanding the camera gear that you already have at your disposal. The next guiding principle for me is to only have one focus area at a time. And I also mentioned it briefly before in the video. Only have one focus area can also help you not overwhelm yourself, and also really try to understand and learn about that one specific topic. So for example, if you're trying to learn about exposure triangle, really understand and invest the time in understanding the ISO, the aperture, the shutter speed, how they work in combination, but also individually. So basically, what does ISO mean if it's a high ISO contra low ISO? So really try to understand one step at a time and one focus area at a time. Guiding principle number 3 for me is to keep learning and growing. My passion for photography has not decreased over the years. It's actually been increasing a lot. And what I'm doing right now is that I'm really trying to understand the history of street photography. And I've been watching a few documentaries on it, and I'm buying different photo books to learn about the different street styles of Henry Cartier-Bresson, Vivian Mayer, or Joel Meyerowitz. And that way I keep myself inspired and motivated to go out on the streets as well. And the last guiding principle, only to look back to see how far you come. I want to end this video with an anecdote on the title of this video. I present myself as a street photographer more and more when I'm asked about my passion or a hobby. And I used to say I was a hobby photographer or I was an amateur photographer, but I am a street photographer. You can call me that. So just remember, you don't need to be an expert to do street photography. I hope this video has inspired you in some way. Take care. See you on the next one.